If you're watching this, you're most likely making over $5,000 a month with either a few hundred or a few thousand followers on Instagram. So in this video, I'm going to teach you the exact system that you need to have to build a super detailed ICP sheet so you know exactly what is happening in your ICP's brain so you can literally manipulate them into buying. I know that sounds a bit harsh, but trust me, you need to actually view this video because it's a legendary video. So I'll break down the transition phase on how you can break past that 5 to 10K per month mark, get high quality clients, and make sure you get good client results so you actually keep getting better and better understanding of your ICP. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get straight into it. This is the last ICP / positioning video you will ever need to scale past 50K per month consistently. So we're going to talk about how to build a real ICP, and it's stupid simple, trust me. The psychology behind buying, so you can literally use triggers to trigger only your ICP in your story sequences, in your content, etc. And the 3 ICP layers that you need to be using so you understand exactly what they're doing, what their behavior is like, and exactly how you can trigger them to buy. So first of all, we're going to cover how to build a real ICP. So this is super simple. So the real point of an ICP is to create predictability within your marketing and demonstrate what an ideal character actually looks like for your product. So first, we're going to talk about how you can collect behavior. So first, you need to define what they need to avoid. So what they avoid, how the actual day-to-day is like, and what they actually avoid. Then you need to define what they believe in. So like their beliefs, all this has to be super defined in a nice doc so you know exactly how and what triggers them to buy. Then you need to know what they value and all of this kind of stuff, etc. And you don't want to prioritize stats like lives in X, wants to make money, is age 20 to 30. You need to be super specific with this because the more specific you are, the better you can target them in your content. So some examples of this is what they avoid. So for example, in a fitness coaching example, it could be complicated diets, long workouts, approaches that feel restrictive, all this kind of stuff. You need to actually map out a list of exactly what they avoid inside their life. Then what they believe in. So I should be in shape, I know better. So for example, a belief that a lot of people have is that I need to be in shape and that will actually get me a girlfriend, for example. That's a belief that a lot of people have, and you need to use that inside your messaging and positioning. So I need something simple I can stick to. So that's another belief, and you need to make a list of every single belief that your ICP has. Now, we're actually going to cover later on how you can actually get all of this data because it's not as easy as you may think. It's not just a Google search. And yeah, afterwards, I'm going to talk about exactly how to use trigger words to get somebody to buy. Like, for example, you post a story sequence, you use a specific sentence, and they just buy. That's how crazy this strat is. It's super simple, and it will make you so much more money. So then you're actually going to talk about what they value. So you need to list out all of the things that they value, like feeling confident, visible progress, simplicity, structure, accountability. All this kind of stuff needs to be tracked, okay? So you need to really understand what their day-to-day is like, what they believe in, what they avoid. You need to understand what they value, and then you're able to craft a perfect offer around that and really create a good content system around all of that, right? So now we're going to talk about how you can actually find these patterns. So you need to have similar reactions to similar situations. You need to know what they find confusing and what do they find easy, etc. Right? So look across all of your clients, all your leads, all of the DMs you get from all of these people. You need to find patterns, and eventually with all of that data you'll create much more predictability, making everything in general much more scalable, which is what we want to scale. So examples of this would be a similar reaction to similar situation. So for example, they're stressed at work, they skip workouts. Social media events, they break the routine and they feel guilt. They have a hard workout and they avoid the workout the next day. So you need to actually create these reactions that they have to certain actions that they do, right? And you need to do that for your ideal avatar, for your ideal client. Now, then you need to actually know what they find confusing. So like the macros, the nutrition, the science, the long complex programs, you need to actually list all of that out and what they find easy. So for example, whether it's following instructions, following a simple done for you plan, a short session on a one-on-one call where you simplify everything. To recap what you need to do is you need to talk to all of your leads, you need to talk to all of your clients, and you need to talk to all of the people inside your DM so you can get a very deep understanding of all of those metrics, right? So now we're going to go on to leveraging the inputs. So you need to actually leverage all of the DMs, the sales calls, all the comments you get. And this kind of data is the best way you can actually get all of this input so you can actually find out the patterns and the behavior data. So yeah, if you want an ICP that actually it gives you real world data from the people that you're trying to target, you can't just do a Google search or ask ChatGPT. You actually need to ask your ICPs. Now you need to do that through comments, DMs, sales calls, and all that. So now we're going to talk about the psychology behind buying. So once you've got your ICP built out and you've got like a list of all of their desires, what they avoid, and all this kind of stuff, we then need to actually talk about what is going to trigger them to buy. So the psychology behind buying. So this is why people actually take action. So the reason why targeting is so important is not only because we can charge higher, have higher authority, and get better data, but certainly most important is that we are able to tap into very precious part of the mind, which is called reciprocity. So now I'm going to explain to you guys what a reciprocity bias actually means and how we can create guilt around targeted value that you post until eventually it's so easy for them to actually pick up on CTAs and actually act upon CTAs. So first, all of the content you put out has to be targeted value. It can't just be some random slot that's on your mind. It has to actually be valuable. Now, if you want a full video explaining how you can do all of your content and how this entire funnel works, just click the first link in the description and that should be the video, but only after watching this, because if you don't have a proper ICP built, then the funnel doesn't actually matter. So when you create this targeted value to only that ICP, it will then trigger insane guilt. The reason being is because they will take no action on that. So when you put out so much value, they're not going to take action. When you see a 40-minute video explaining how an entire funnel works or how this X step works, they're just not going to take action because that's how the human mind works. They're not going to take any action because they don't have to. So what's gonna happen is that they start to feel guilt because that's what reciprocity means. It means that they feel the need to give back. Now that's exactly what we want because then it's very easy for them to act upon CTAs and do what we want. So once they act upon CTAs, they can get on a sales call and they just get closed. So when you're creating a piece of content, you need to ask yourself, am I giving away everything I know or am I still being stringy? You need to actually ask that yourself because if you're just putting out something that you've got on the top of your head, but it's not actually valuable to anybody, then it's not going to work. Because the absolute key here is not to gatekeep any information. Everything you know has to be put out for completely free, and you need to sell the implementation because you need to sell the accountability, the one-on-one personalization. But all of the information you need to put out for completely free. So below are the 3 more crucial psychological biases that play a role within the psychology of buying. So the loss aversion bias. Now, so far what I've explained all seems kind of complicated, but I promise you it's not. All you have to do, from what I've explained so far, is you need to talk to people in the DMs, the sales calls, and all the comments. So you collect patterns and collect the behavior, so you know exactly how to build a structured list on all of those details. Now I just talked about the reciprocity bias. That's pretty simple. All you have to do is need to create value around that ICP, and then they will have no action, they'll feel guilt, and then they'll just trigger upon CTAs. So it's super simple. But the loss aversion bias is a psychological bias that people have, which means that the pain of losing is much more intense than the actual happiness of winning. Think about it, right? Imagine somebody gives you something for free, a free gift, right? And then they take it away from you. You will feel pain, and you won't actually feel the same intensity as you did from actually getting the gift. You will obviously feel happiness, but actually losing something is 5 times more intense. So you need to actually leverage this inside your offer. Now, the way we do this is, here's a real life example. So instead of saying e-commerce coaching, make $10,000 a month online, you need to say something like this. E-commerce coaching, be an early adopter in the niche and never work a 9 to 5 again. That is if you apply. So you've got a little CTA down here, and then this actual part over here is something that they might lose. So you need to talk about the loss that they have by not joining your program and not what they get. Obviously, you still need to talk about what they get, but you need to lean more into what they're gonna lose if they don't join, because then that intensity is way higher. So you need to ask yourself, what life does my ICP not want? And then you'll get the answer to that question. Now we're going to talk about the actual cognitive load, which is also super important. So you need to structure your offer and position your offer as if it was a shiny object. Now the way we want to position it as a shiny object is for it to be simple to understand, short, and for it to be only to you, custom to you. Nobody else should have what you're selling because you've positioned it as a shiny object. Whereas if you just sell something like everybody else does, for example, you can sell a Amazon FBA course, right? Amazon FBA, right? But you can also sell the 10K per month playbook. So the 10K per month playbook, right? Now, obviously that's a pretty bad example, but that's just because of it's off the top of my head. But you need to really sit down and make it like a shiny object, because that makes it seem unique to you, and it's also to do with branding a lot. You need to actually brand your actual offer so that nobody else has that, and that's the cognitive load. Now, lastly, we're going to move on to the 3 ICP layers, which is the identity, the motivation, and the triggers. The triggers is the most important part in all of this, because those are the trigger words that get people to buy. So first, identity. So what is the identity? This is the self-image, internal standards, who they refuse to be, and what makes them feel like they're winning / failing. That's the identity of your ICP. Now, your messaging should either do one of these 2 things: upgrade this identity or protect this identity. So here are some identity themes and examples. So wants to feel like disciplined version of themselves, or sees fitness as part of their personal standards, or feels embarrassed when they fall off, right? All of this ties into either upgrading the identity that you've labeled them as, or you're protecting this identity by making sure they don't lose it. So that's what you need to do inside the identity. You need to actually map this out on a Google Doc. Now, motivation. This is super important, because without motivation, they're not going to feel the urge to buy, okay? So for the motivation, we have either approaching their goals or avoiding their goals. Now, this is also known as positive motivation or negative motivation. The primary motivation is avoiding decline, not chasing aesthetics, right? So avoiding weight gain, avoiding losing confidence, avoiding feeling sluggish. So this is all part of the motivation for them to actually move forward and move past that. What we also find is that the negative motivation is always much more effective for successful people, since you can imagine it much better. And most likely for you, negative positioning will do much better. So yeah, that's the negative and positive motivation. That's super important. Now here we're going to talk about triggers. So trigger 1 is preservation. So preservation trigger is basically an emotional trigger that somebody has when they fear losing something or not achieving X amount of results. So think of it like this: if we don't hit 5K this month, so 5K this month, then we will actually be behind on our schedule, right? Something like that. Now that's a preservation trigger. Now this is super important that you need to actually implement in your story sequences and all of your content, because all of these triggers are vital. So that's the trigger you need to have. That's the preservation trigger, where basically it's an example like, if we don't hit 5K per month, we will be behind schedule. So that's like, if we don't achieve X, we will have Y. That's the preservation trigger. Then we've got the contrast trigger. Now this is actually really unique, because I'm sure I've actually felt this contrast trigger quite a few times when I was looking at other people and watching other people's content. Now, what contrast trigger means is, it means that, for example, you start following somebody on Instagram and you see that they had 200 followers when you started following them, right? And now, say you look back and they're at 100,000 followers, right? Now, that's a contrast trigger, because that means that, wow, they were at 200 followers when I started following them like a month ago, and now they've gained like 99,800 followers, right? That's what you need. That's the contrast trigger. It's a contrast from now and before. That's what you need to actually implement also. is a contrast trigger. So it's kind of makes somebody feel like, what does this guy know that I don't? That's what it makes them feel with a contrast trigger. Lastly, we've got the surge trigger, which is an emotional trigger, and it's basically you need to trigger a very strong emotion. This is the surge trigger. When they feel a strong emotion, it's kind of like an impulse, right? They need to feel something very strong in order to buy. And those are the 3 triggers. So that's super important that you need to understand. And this was the ICP video. And at the same time, if you want to know exactly how you can build this entire funnel around this ICP and how you can actually run ads, how you can get good content, and how you can track everything fully automatically with AI, just click on this video right here or click the first link in the description and